Hello and welcome to The Green Room by Deloitte, the podcast which asks the tricky questions about the world around us. I'm George Parrett, and today we're asking, should we be teaching kids to code? Hello, thank you so much for downloading. I'm back from paternity leave and ready to dive back into the world of podcasts and The Green Room. I'm with Ethan today. How's it going, Ethan?
Welcome back, George. And it's good to be back for the last episode of the season. I think it's a fitting one considering we started this journey together, and it links quite nicely back to episode 1 as well when we were talking about automation and the future of work.
It's the circle of life, Ethan, that's right. And today we are pitting Python against Pythagoras, C# against Shakespeare, and we're going to learn about how important it is for kids to code. Who have we got with us?
So today we're joined with Sheree Atcheson. Sheree is the Consulting Inclusion Lead at Deloitte. She is also the Global Ambassador of Women Who Code, a non-profit organisation dedicated to tackling the gender gap within the technology industry. Hi, Sheree.
Hi.
And we're joined by Michael Kolawole. Michael is a Computing Ambassador for Teach First. He's based at ARK Kings Academy in the West Midlands as the Head of Computing and Head of Year Learning. Hi, Michael.
Hello.
And it is tradition on the podcast that we first do a icebreaker question.
Okay.
So I'll reach into my bucket, see what we have this week. Okay. So if you could be in a film of your choice, what film would you choose and what character would you play?
Oh my goodness.
It's quite difficult on this one.
Yeah. Do you want to go first?
Yeah, I'm thinking about The Lord of the Rings. I'm thinking about an epic trilogy, a journey, starting from humble beginnings in the Shire. And I'm going to have to go for Frodo. Or maybe Sam. I think that the strong supporting role,
Very
I
epic.
think I really enjoy actually being on the sidelines of history and being a part of that journey.
I think the ending for Sam is a bit nicer as well.
Yes.
Potentially, yeah.
Yeah. Instrumental.
Well, no big feat for me to try and beat that. I'm going to go with Terminator. Because the evolution of Sarah Connor is fantastic. And she is one of the OG badass people that you can be. Do you know what I mean? That evolution from being scared and not knowing what to do to leading an entire revolution. So I'm going to go with Terminator.
Reminds me of George leading this podcast.
I know, well, I'm slightly scared about what's happening next.
To be honest, yeah.
Well, I mean, I watch an awful lot of Disney princess films at the moment, so I was going to go for Elsa from Frozen. But I think another Disney film, topical at the moment, Toy Story, Buzz Lightyear, To Infinity and Beyond. I think that's a good mantra to live by. So.
I think mine has to be Harry Potter. I grew up on the books and I just couldn't, although his family is dead. So maybe I'd go with Hermione, I think. She's a badass female, one of the best wizards, becomes the Minister for Magic. So yeah,
spoilers.
She would be my choice. Sorry. I mean, spoilers for Harry Potter now.
Yeah.
Great, well let's dive into this week's question. Should we be teaching kids to code? I guess it's quite nice. This is the last episode in our first series of the Green Room podcast, and throughout the series we've often come to this topic about skills and the need to future-proof skills, whether it's from automation or we had a great episode while I was off on creativity. And I think I imagine this conversation may hark home to that general theme as well. But Michael, if I could come to you first, what skills are kids currently lacking, and what do they need in the future?
Well, that's a very big question. So what are children lacking? In my opinion, in the classroom, it's IT literacy, digital literacy, having skills to code as well. So to my first point, so I hear from parents on a parents' evening, the parents will say, oh, my kid knows how to create and set up my internet connection, they can fix everything, they don't have to fix my computers, but actually what they're seeing is just kids knowing how to use technology and not knowing how it actually works. So that relates to, making sure children know how to code and create software, which is a really important skill to have as well. And also just being literate online. So there's a layer of software that's over our lives now. Software, if it's not already, it's controlling your home, it's controlling large parts of our schools, it's coming into the hospitals as well. And we should know how that operates, how that affects us. If we're not knowing, if we're just knowing how to use it, not knowing how it works, how we can improve upon it, then we're losing. Our kids are losing out on the jobs of the future.
And Sheree, would you sort of feel that's the same way regarding people coming into the workforce?
Yeah, I think we see people coming in from a whole host of varying backgrounds now, and that means that some people have had the privilege of being tech illiterate, but it also means that we have people that haven't had that exposure, and it's on us, when the organisation that they come into, that we have that support, because like you said, we have to ensure that, you know, people are going into jobs that haven't existed 10 years ago. We are forming solutions that will change how we live, breathe, move, get on the train, get off the train, all of these other things that we're doing every day. And if we don't support our people with that phrase tech literacy, we're not doing them the service that they need, and that is incredibly important in any industry, not just the computing industry as a whole.
And I think you both had a similar theme around tech literacy. Is that, when it boils down to it, coding, or is it more than that?
It's a good point. It's more than just coding. Mm-hmm. It's coding or programming is a central part of it, but it's more of a vehicle, and a very efficient vehicle to teach a lot of the computational thinking skills. But also it's coding, it's tech literacy or digital literacy, mm-hmm. as well as knowing how to stay safe online. So in education, it's 2 or 3 different parts in one.
Yeah, and I think if when we get into the world of work and we look at sort of technology as a whole now, and computer programming and software engineering plays a huge part in that, but there's also the technical side of creativity, there's a technical side of automation, there's all of these other things that, whilst aren't necessarily coding, are still incredibly important to future tech literacy of, you know, society as a whole, and those very much have to be considered when we are looking at, you know, the jobs of the future, the people of the future, all of those things hand in hand.
Yeah, so you've got obviously programming, you've got networking, cyber security.
Exactly, yeah.
You've got computer systems, computer architecture as well. There's a lot that goes into the curriculum at not just Key Stage 3, but obviously also at Key Stage 4 and 5, mm-hmm. that is building on, and not just programming. I think a lot of people see computer science mm-hmm. as simply coding, but actually there's a lot that goes into mm-hmm.
The
curriculum as well.
Definitely. And you used the phrase computational thinking. So that came up a lot in my kind of research.
Yeah.
I still don't think I could give a particularly good explanation of what that means. I was wondering if you could maybe explain that a bit for our listeners and also for me.
Yeah, sure. I can give it a go. So it's normally the first lesson I go through actually with my students at Key Stage 4. So it's a way of thinking, I think, just to say it in a sentence, and it's a way to structure different phenomena as well. So it comprises of four parts. So abstraction, which refers to removing any unuseful information from a problem, so you can focus on the key essentials. If you think about, for example, the tube map is a classic example, created by, I believe it's Harry Beck as well, where before the map was showing landmarks around the tube map stations, but he removed all the info you don't need and just focus on obviously what station is when and what line it is on. You've got algorithmic thinking as well, which refers to having a step-by-step set of instructions to solve a given problem. Think of a recipe or to that you would follow. You've got decomposition. When you have got a complex problem, you want to break it down into several parts as well. So which can be applied in any arena. So you may have an English question you want to address. It's asking a big question, and you break it down to several parts. So you can tackle each one individually, and it's a lot more simpler to solve. And the last one is pattern recognition. So finding out similarities to help you understand how to solve the problem. So let's say, for example, you've got some M&Ms and you've got friends who like different types of M&Ms. Obviously, you want to separate them via color and then distribute them if you like. But if you think about any kind of problem you have, you look for patterns that you've seen in the past, perhaps, and that can help you to address a future problem or that particular problem as well. So it's a way of thinking that we want to use to address, whether it be climate change, or whether it be addressing cancer cells, or whether it be any kind of big phenomena that you can think of. computational thinking can be applied in some variation to really address that complex problem and empower people to address it.
But the idea is that with the world we live in now, it requires more computational thinking in order to tackle some of these issues. But surely some of these issues have happened for decades beforehand. But I'm not sure whether it was just a case of no one ever having defined it as computational thinking before, or just using different skills were helpful. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I actually agree with you there. So we talk a lot about problem solving. We talk about communication skills, the 21st century skills, soft skills. And I agree with you, George. Actually, these skills have been important for quite some time. I think where CT is important, or computational thinking is important in this particular arena that is computer science education. It's a scenario where it can really foster these skills in a particular way. So when we say about skills of the future, we're talking about computing skills and how computational thinking can be used with technology to really address these problems as well. So it's more looking at how it's a different way of seeing the same skills, if you like, a more helpful way of viewing them.
Definitely. And then how do you think the kind of softer skills come into this? Because a lot of the conversations we've been having on past podcasts, so around automation in the future of work and around the role of creativity in the future, a lot of the insight that's coming out is that softer skills are actually getting more important as we're moving towards this digital age. Yeah. I don't know if that's something you agree with.
Yeah, and I think I would prefer to call them human skills versus softer skills, because that gives a connotation that they are less important or less pertinent than harder technical skills. And one of the things that we see as we are, certainly in my role, leading inclusion, and as we build teams, we build leaders, we can see that empathy and compassion and at this most base level, being able to listen to someone and not performatively listening, but truly listening, is a skill. And it's something that, if you lack that, you're not as strong as a leader as someone who can truly do that. And we have to, again, ensure that those skills are prioritized in the same way that we perhaps look at, whether it's in an interview process and we're looking at, hard skills, technical skills. We're also acutely aware that we're looking out for people that have these skills as well. And if they don't have them, how do we help them fill that gap? Can we help them, whether it's through sponsorship, mentoring, dedicated training programs? Because we can't have leaders that simply just have the technical side of skills. We need both the human and the technical things to come together. And you mentioned automation, and automation is fantastic because it takes out the repetitive, boring things and allows humans to focus on the creative side of things. And again, it's the human side of things. You can't, train a robot, or maybe you will be someday, but you certainly can't now train a robot to be empathetic and compassionate from a human perspective. And certainly that's something that's very important to me in my own personal career and in any of the people that I'm sort of building up, is remember that the human side of things, the ability to talk to someone, regardless of what level they are, is incredibly important, and certainly important when we look at pairing that with tech literacy, because that's when you get people that are exceptional, is when they remember both sides of the coin are equally as important.
And Sheree, we read a lot about the need for more STEM skills and things like that. How does that fit into this, or are we talking about the same thing here?
Yeah, we need more STEM skills. We can see in industry, and certainly from a diversity perspective, we do not have enough diverse representation in industry. We know that we don't have enough women or people of colour or all of the other different people from various different backgrounds represented in the way that they should be. Our industries and our organisations should match society. And we have to do a lot of work to ensure that we are reaching people, like I mentioned at the start, that might not be as privileged, who have had the exposure, the potential, teachers that understood why this was important, and the environment at home, again, to have people that support those kinds of thinking that are different. And when we look at how we then support people that are in the industry, there's a whole host of things we have to do, because we need diverse thinking in STEM. We cannot create the solutions of tomorrow with only one type of thinking or two types of thinking. And we can see things in industry that have went wrong when this has happened. So, for example, we've seen in facial recognition software systems that have been made, but they haven't used enough people of colour and dark-skinned people of colour in the testing and the QA stage, so then the recognition doesn't work in the way it should for them versus their white counterparts. We see all of these different things that are happening because diversity wasn't thought about at the stage when it should have. And that's why we need more diversity in STEM, because we are not creating the best solutions we can without it.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting, especially also when you're thinking about coding and machine-based learning, that idea that what we really want to avoid, which I think was one of the messages from our first podcast, is the biases that exist in society, building that into the machines.
And that's dangerous.
Definitely.
Yeah.
I mean, how would you go about that? Do you think it is around increasing diverse representation, or do you think it's about having people that understand those and can mitigate for them?
I think from my perspective in industry, and I'm keen to hear yours as well after.
Definitely, yeah. I've got a few points.
Whenever we're trying to ensure, and not necessarily just trying, but are ensuring that we are not mimicking the bias that we all have, we need to ensure that there is a leadership engagement in understanding how we are ensuring that we are not mimicking our own lived experiences. And a really powerful way to do that is spending the time understanding privilege and understanding what it truly means that me as a XYZ have been able to progress, but perhaps my gender, my skin colour, my sexuality hasn't played a part in making this more difficult. Flip that and consider what it is like for those that it has played a role in, because that changes people's journeys in STEM and people's journeys in an industry that is difficult for people of underrepresented or marginalised groups. And one of the things I do a lot with our leaders here and our leaders across Europe is spending time doing sort of unconscious bias and privilege awareness sessions, because I think we have to understand that not everybody has the direct or indirect lived experiences to understand why is this a big deal that I prioritize, widening the talent pool, or why is this a big deal that, I could hire this person, it's going to take me 3 months longer to find someone else, or why should I have to make accommodations because they have caring responsibilities, this person doesn't, and I could hire them tomorrow, helping them understand the impact of those decisions. So I think if we continue to not understand other people's lived experiences, if we don't challenge ourselves to understand that, and particularly putting in measures to ensure that people have to, if you're in a certain position, you have to learn and listen to other people, then we will not form the kind of industry that we need to. We will continue to see these things happen that have happened because representation has not been in the room, and not just at leadership levels, but at the teams that are building these products, that are managing the software teams, all of these other people, right down to our interns. If we do not have representation at all of these levels, things get missed. And the problem is that things are getting missed that are very, very serious. So we have to prioritise diversity and inclusion.
Yeah, that's a great point. I mean, I mentioned before about software, there being a layer of software over the world around us, and you want to make sure there's a diverse range of people who are developing that software that runs our lives, that will dictate the way we live. As a classroom teacher, obviously, I'm conscious about how many people are taking up my subject at GCSE level. I want to make sure there's a good mix of boys and girls and from different ethnic backgrounds. It is challenging. It's very challenging, and I think it's almost another podcast episode in itself. I think first and foremost, I want to make sure it's not just all boys taking up computer science. You want that diversity for the reasons you just mentioned before, and you want that range of thought process as well, or ideas and experiences. I think what I try to do in the classroom is offer role models from different places to show the kids that, look, actually there are other people who look like you, who also work in computer science or computer science related roles. I think if you look in popular culture, if you look at films, if you look at perhaps the leading CEOs in this in the tech industry, the choices are it's getting bigger. There are more choices or role models, but it's not as many as a teacher that you can draw from easily and say, look, this is what's happening. I draw on Sheryl Sandberg, Melissa Mayer as examples. Ada Lovelace, if you want to go back a couple of thousand years, and But in reality, as a student, it comes up to what they see every day. Mm-hmm. I can put an example on the screen, but they need to be seeing that person every day. I'm conscious, obviously, as a male teacher, it's just that bit hard for me to attract girls to take up computer science because they see it as a boy subject.
Are you seeing progress though year on year in terms of that diversity? And then I guess the same question to Sheree in terms of the workforce coming in. I think.
Yeah. So when I first came in, there were maybe just maybe 5% of the class were girls, and it's got up to sort of 20%, which is around the national average. I want it to be more. This year we're looking at again that same amount, 20%, maybe a quarter, taking it at GCSE in year 10. But it's taken a lot of work, definitely. I mentioned before, actually, to you, Sheree, before we began recording about going to the IT Girls Aloud event. That is an event run by Barclaycard, who put on this event to encourage girls to take up computer science, giving them a chance to talk to role models and get engaged in a whole range of activities to spark their imagination in this area. I've also taken a group of students to Google headquarters. We've met the CEO of Google for Education over there as well, seen the offices, seen the range of people working there, just to make sure the kids see, all right, this is actually an option for me as well, and not just one particular group of students. Yeah.
And I think there's lots of great organisations externally that do so much to shift that. So there is Coder Dojo, there is STEMettes, there is people like me that all work to firstly provide skills to people that may not have had access, and then provide relatable role models. And I think that's such an important part, and we do a lot, certainly with partnering not just with those organisations here, but also our people going out to schools, our people spending the time with a school that has a connection to them, because it is very different. And one of the things we've done with Women Who Code is a youth outreach programme. It's very different, certainly when we look at, let's say, outside of London. We want to make sure that people have relatable role models, and what that should look like, or would hopefully look like, is someone that maybe has a similar background to them, a similar upbringing, a similar accent. And that's something that's really important, is that people feel that attachment to someone. You don't have to be a CEO or a millionaire to potentially, or to be a role model. Fame is not a prerequisite to be a role model. And there's lots of great organisations to shift that. And likewise, when we're in industry now, there's a lot of fantastic organisations that are highlighting female, people of colour, all of the other underrepresented groups as role models, because they are role models, but their stories haven't been told before in the way that they should have been amplified. And it's on us now to do that. And I know certainly from our perspective, our new consulting leader is a woman, our new people and purpose partner in consulting is a woman. We have very strong, powerful people with very different backgrounds to the norm taking up these phenomenal leadership positions. And that makes it a whole lot more attainable for XYZ to potentially do that. But a conscious effort has to be made. This won't just happen if we sort of hope for the best, or I would love to have more representation. No, I need to have more representation, and this is the strategy to how we're going to do that. And I guess that's why my role exists, otherwise I would be out of a job. So
well, that's good then, I think. But I think, so if the corporate world is kind of leading the way a bit, it seems to me, and we've got two teachers in the room, that the education side of things might need to catch up a little bit in order to make that diverse pool there and make coding accessible to all, and therefore remove these sort of biases in the future, computers and things like that. But how and doing my research on this, computer science has been part of the curriculum since 2014, I think, and
the curriculum came in 2014,
which is I wasn't that aware of that, but yeah, we're still. Often, I think I've talked to you about this before, Ethan, how the subjects we learn at school, English, maths, sciences, they're very kind of industrial revolution-y themes, and they're teaching you different skills, and we've discussed that. But it seems to be we need to sort of evolve faster a little bit. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, and actually, it's actually a bit of a cycle actually with this. So in the 80s, there was the home computer boom. Actually, in the 80s, the BBC was was very good in sharing out the BBC Micro, which was an 8-bit computer system that was very slow compared to what we've got right now, but it was to encourage people to get involved in coding. And in the 90s, when we sort of slipped quite a bit actually in the UK, and we saw, rather than the emphasis on coding, it was more on how to use computers. There's a big drive on ICT, MS Office, and how do you use software applications, how do you use them. And then now we've gone back, actually, all right, we've got all these people who can use Word really well, but actually they can't code. So now we need to obviously make sure we actually discontinue ICT and now have a look at making a more academically rigorous qualification that perhaps is more relevant for employers in the future. Hence computer science coming in. You did ECDL.
Was that the
European Computer Driving License. Yes.
I think I remember doing that when I did GCSE, ICT. I remember that. Yeah.
Amazing PowerPoint.
Okay.
Well, that's useful for being a consultant. So
yeah. But you are right. But in the UK though, we are doing really well compared to other countries actually. Right? Other countries look to us actually and see what we're doing. We've got Computing at Schools, which is a big organisation which supports computing teachers, and they have hubs all over the country where teachers can come together, share best practice, develop their pedagogy in the subject as well. But you mentioned a point about, obviously you want to make sure that there's a more of a diverse population working in the area, but also we're not having enough people go into computer science actually at GCSE. So when ICT was ended effectively, the amount of people who stopped doing ICT, obviously because it was discontinued, we didn't see a similar figure opting into computer science actually. So although the amount of computer scientists is increasing, it's actually very small increases. We're not seeing enough people going into it. And back to your earlier point, actually, about the diversity of the workforce. Unfortunately, a lot of schools are seeing it as a tough qualification, a difficult GCSE to go into. So it's more for people who have the high grades in maths, and that can limit the kind of students who go for that qualification. So obviously there's a lot that needs to go into the qualification and make sure it's accessible and make sure that teachers are feeling confident in delivering this curriculum to the students as well.
And is there a supply issue in terms of just amount of teachers? Because when I was a teacher, I know that a lot of the teachers that were trained in being business teachers were sometimes put on to cover computing lessons just purely because they didn't have enough employees that could cover all the hours that needed to be taught. I don't know if it was just an example in my school or if that's more of a wider problem that in fact was struggling to recruit people to teach.
Yeah, so I remember a French teacher teaching me for GCSE ICT, and I'll never forget. She was trying really hard, obviously, to deliver the lesson. The kids knew that she didn't know what she was really doing. Yeah. And I'll never forget, I was a very studious individual. I was in the corner, just working away on my coursework. It was great. And then she just tapped me on my shoulder. Michael, would you mind actually sharing your work with the class? So that was my first experience of teaching. Yeah. So yeah, there is a big supply issue. So I train with Teach First, and I think each year Teach First really struggled to really encourage a lot of computer scientists to leave university or come in from industry to start the program. I want to say that sometimes it's in single figures, the amount of teachers they introduce into Teach First schools. Compare that to English or maths, where it's so obviously in the hundreds. I think it's 700 or 800 in maths each year. Some years perhaps not been able to recruit at all. And if I look at the schools in my local area too, I try to collaborate as much as possible, and I see a lot of teachers who either moved from a different subject, or maybe it was, perhaps it was maybe French or PE, and they were moved into ICT because it was seen as a qualification that you didn't need a degree in that area to teach, and suddenly you've got the curriculum change into computer science, and obviously then it's a whole different whole different ball game, and it leads to not just a shortage of teachers, but a shortage of teachers who are really confident with the curriculum as well.
Because it seems computer science is quite a vocational subject really to learn at GCSE level, and which is probably quite unusual when you compare it to other subjects. But I mean, do you think that's useful? And as an employer, should we be looking at more as students coming through who've done more vocational topics?
Yeah, and I think one of the reasons just on, we didn't see, like you mentioned, the uptick whenever, even though we didn't have ICT anymore, we didn't see the significant rise in computing. And that's, for me, if we let's look at that from a marketing perspective, computing and computer science isn't marketed in the way ICT was. The way people talk about it isn't the way that we spoke about ICT. It sounds more elusive, it feels more complicated, it feels like it's harder than it should be, when actually it's a very open, creative environment to work in. You're making things that have never been created before. But if people feel like, oh, this is something that has never been done before, I'm not going to be able to do it, I don't know anybody that's done it, my mum and dad don't know anything about it either, so that means I should just do biology or something instead. And there's a big gap there in how do teachers, because we have Michael here who knows this like the back of his hand, but how many teachers do we have like Michael? How many more people do we need like him to ensure that, like, if you have children, they're spending so much time with teachers, so they're a huge influence on them. So if you have a teacher who's either previously teaching ICT, been thrown in at the deep end to teach computing, that has a direct impact on children who might feel like, oh, well, the teacher clearly doesn't really understand it, so I won't understand it. There's a disconnect. And then if we are looking at, from an employer perspective, firstly, I think we need to start looking at experience versus qualifications. I think that's something that's very, very important. Even if we're talking about degrees aren't necessary for someone to be excellent at certain things. Experience is what we're interested in, because that's what gives you a unique perspective, and it's your passion and the things you're interested in. But I think there is a big gap, and certainly from growing up in rural Ireland, and we had one computing teacher in the entire area that we grew up in, and he was phenomenal. He was so amazing, and I've done lots of interviews and I mention him regularly, because if I hadn't have had him, I wouldn't have become a computer scientist at the first instance. And then due to budget cuts, etc., he ended up after several years just teaching maths as well, because he used to do both, just now then only did maths before he retired. So how many children have missed out on something so fantastic because the teacher played a huge pivotal role there? But how do we then, from Michael's perspective, how do we get more people that are doing computer science, software engineering, interested in playing such a massive, impactful role to the next generation? And it's admirable to go into teaching, of course it is a vocation, but how do we create that connection? Because that's the only way, I think, if we have really passionate individuals like you with our children, with the people of tomorrow that are leading the world, then that's how we ignite that thing. But if we don't have that, what do we do?
It's a bit chicken and egg, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. Yeah, no pressure on Michael. You just fix everything.
But it's a bit like the video games industry is massive in the UK, but and it outsells films and CDs and things like that. And that involves a hell of a lot of programming and creativity and all those skills Michael mentioned beforehand. So maybe it's a bit of a PR problem, really. I'm thinking from my marketer's hat, but perhaps it is that is not quite packaged or sold as attractive as it should be. And
we do see things like Minecraft and Scratch and MIT App Inventor that are shifting that narrative. We can see young children that are, because they don't even realize they're coding when they're playing Minecraft or when they're building something. And then there's the marketing following with that, with streamers and all those different kinds of things that make it really exciting and accessible. So I think that's why it's exciting now as well. We see this shift in what coding means. Coding doesn't just mean making the back end of a system anymore. It means building your own house in Minecraft. It means doing all of these things that are, I guess, gateways into development roles.
Definitely. I think that's a really interesting point. And George said that it was a more vocational subject, but perhaps maybe it's moving now towards, you don't teach English because you want everyone to write novels, but you teach English so people can understand the language. And maybe with coding, it's about, as you said right at the beginning, understanding being tech literate, understanding that digital environment that we all live in now and what that means.
Yeah, in the national curriculum, the first line says something along the lines of it's to understand and be able to change the world. So it is at the same time, it is a very academically rigorous qualification, but there's a lot of creativity that goes into computer science. I mean, if you think about what programming is giving or programming a system to perform some kind of task, some sort of complex task, and you're almost in a sense creating a virtual world that that's come from your imagination. I mean, in my classroom, the amount of times I've seen kids look at a blank screen and then create something, have errors, debug, and they're sort of have that eureka moment when they solve an error or when they complete something. It is a very creative and actually very fun qualification to go for.
I mean, this question, after everything we've discussed, is probably not accurate, but one of the things I wanted to ask before, because it was when I was researching this topic, it was a small, but there was some traction to this idea that in fact we shouldn't be teaching kids to code at all, because in 5-10 years machines will be coding for us, so we're actually just setting them up to fail. I mean, do you have any views on that? Do you think there's any truth in that argument at all?
Okay, so I think I should keep my job because well, I hear a similar sort of thing actually, believe it or not, in education as well. People say actually we won't need teachers in the future because machines will do my job for me. I think people say, okay, is coding, is it a fad? Is it a tech fad? Is it going to come and go? But just look in the employment area, look at industry. Actually, there's a lot of companies who are crying out for people with these skills. So it's moved from just you should code, it's fun, it's important. It's moved to you should code, it's fun, it's important. Actually, we really need you to do this because of all these jobs. How many jobs are going unfilled at the moment in the STEM industry? How many new jobs are being created that need to be filled? How many jobs will there be that we don't know about in the future? So those jobs will require people who can code, students who can code, who have an understanding of how these programs work, and therefore are able to have a hand in shaping a society that is, as I said before, becoming more and more surrounded by software. Yeah,
like I think you mentioned earlier that sort of the technology layer that covers the world, and that's only going to get bigger and bigger and bigger. And yes, some of the roles will be automated and some of them won't require humans, but a lot of them will, and a lot of them will require strategic, analytical, forward-thinking, disruptive minds, and that's where we need people. We need people to do that. We can't train a machine to do that, and nor do we want to. We want the human element in our software. As that technology layer gets thicker and thicker, we want to make sure that it meets the needs of society, and it can only do that if we have people involved in the process.
But to qualify the question, just a small amount, obviously computer science, the tech industry is always changing. And what I'm teaching the kids now, I probably won't be, maybe I'll be changing in 2-3 years down the line. Actually, there'll be perhaps a new, perhaps a different software, programming language, different software, different skills that they'll need to navigate to navigate cyberspace. That would be really important. But however, the skills that underpin coding will still be relevant as well in the future.
Agree.
Should I learn to code, or is it too late for me?
You can always learn to code. It's never too late.
Yeah. I can give you a few websites if you want.
Loads.
To start you off.
Why not?
Yeah.
I was going to ask the same thing. I'm also looking into coding.
You might be more successful than me.
Yeah, I think that's one of the, and certainly from a women who code perspective, that's why it has became the largest non-profit in that space, because we are helping adult women learn to code that are already in industry, that want to get in, that have had career breaks, all of these other things, providing them with the technical skills they need. But that's the point. It's not about, just young minds learning how to code. This is about people that have backgrounds in nursing and people that have backgrounds in banking and all of these other things that want to explore what that's like. And again, what we mentioned at the start is the tech industry is so varied. There's so many different ways to get involved in that space. And I think regardless of what age you are, there is always a way to find what suits you and get involved in a way that makes sense for you and whatever life stage that you are at.
Yeah, also I'd say if you know how to code, if you better understand the software you're using, it can expand your imagination about how it can be used, or perhaps how it could be improved as well. So, and that won't just relate to if you're working in the tech industry, but any region, whether in medicine, in education, if you better understand how to code, or how certain software operates, you can look at how it can be improved, how it can be changed to better help you in whatever job you're doing. So you might be surprised actually if you learn to spend an hour a week on Code Academy. Yeah. It might really help you.
So Sheree, it's encouraging to hear that there's demand for people to retrain and learn computer skills and coding. What's driving that demand, and how can we get more people to do it?
I think we see, even from an awareness outside of the technology circles, there's a much stronger awareness in the media, in our everyday lives of what technology can do. That incites people's interest, that ignites people to want to figure out, how can I play a role, can I be involved? There's also the side of these are well-paid jobs, and they have a clear career progression as well. There's a security in technology jobs, because we know that technology is just getting more and more intertwined into medicine, everything that exists, and that piques people's curiosities. We do a lot of great stuff in getting people back into technology. So we recently launched a returners tech training program with Makers Academy, which provide a coding boot camp to applicants who have had a career break from 2 to 15 years. And what we're doing there is we're understanding that in the market there are people that have had career breaks that have these excellent skills that you mentioned earlier, Michael. The technology's changed, but the skills stay the same, the underpinning skills stay the same. But these people have all of these other skills and different things that they've grown to learn through those life experiences, whether it's a 2-year career break or a 15-year career break. But being able to provide them with a hard-hitting coding bootcamp that then allows us to bring them back into the industry is fantastic. And again, Women Who Code, where we provide free monthly meetups on all of the areas that are being hired on each of our locations. We have over 180,000 members and a presence in over 60 cities. We run over 7,000 free events per year. We give over $1 million worth of scholarships to women in tech per year. So we are actively filling that gap where people have needed support, and people are getting more excited by working in tech, but we have to then ensure that it is accessible. And that's where programs like our partnership with Makers Academy, where Women Who Code, Code First Girls, all of these different things play a huge part in, leveling access to the tech industry, which I think is very, very important.
And Michael, how do we build up the demand for a 16-year-old girl who to try and get her to learn Java instead of German?
Definitely had that one in the bank.
There is some overlap there actually. Obviously, you want to use role models, and also you want to say there is demand for this type of work, this type of role. There's a future in this area, not just that girl, that student, but also perhaps their parents too, who also given her ideas about what she should do in the future and what would be beneficial long term. So making sure that they know there's a future in this industry. And I think a simple answer too, it just needs great teaching as well.
So we've spoken a lot about improving opportunities for students to get involved with coding, obviously through school, but I feel there's also a role that business can play in that. So here at Deloitte, we have a 1 Million Futures programme where we support around 20 partnership schools. We have a partnership with Teach First and Ada. And in fact, we have at Swanley School, a code club, which is an after-school coding club for students. It's got a big uptake in that school. Do you think there is room for businesses to help advance this, or do you think it needs to just be done internally in schools?
Oh, 1,000%, definitely. I agree. I mentioned before about role models coming in and talking to students. I think particularly female students too, and I think students who see people from a diverse background, it's very, very important. I mentioned before about IT Girls Aloud with Barclaycard. I think that was a very instrumental event. I saw a big uptake in the amount of students who took computer science the following year. I think the more you can link what people are doing in the classroom with what they're doing outside of the classroom and sparking that imagination and seeing it's more than just something that's mathematical, it's something that can be very creative and you can create virtual worlds, then that is very beneficial. So yes.
Definitely. I think sometimes that external presence as well can be quite exciting for kids, and it's like, oh, this is now the real world, not just outside of school.
Not just me on the.
Well, Sheree, Michael, thank you so much for coming and explaining all of this to us today. I've learned a heck of a lot, and it's been a fascinating sort of topic, really. So I guess before we go, could you answer this week's question? Should we be teaching kids to code? Sheree?
Yes.
That's easy, Michael?
Yeah.
Yes, we definitely should. I agree with Sheree.
Yes.
Fantastic. There you go. Thank you very much.
Thanks for coming in.
Thank you again for tuning into this week's episode of The Green Room, and Ethan and I and Lizzie and Dara hope you all enjoyed the first season of The Green Room. Sadly, we're having a bit of a summer break, but we'll be back in September to answer all of your burning questions in the future. In the meantime, you can find all of our podcasts on one designated website, which is on deloitte.co.uk/Green Room Podcasts, and you'll be able to leave reviews on your regular podcast feed. Please give us 5 stars, and do feel free to give us some comments.
Thanks for listening to this episode of The Green Room by Deloitte. We'll be back in September with our next big question. This podcast is produced by our very own pod squad and hosted by George Parrett, Lizzie Elston, Ethan Worth and Dara Latinwell. Thanks to our creative studio for their technical support. Original music by Ali Barrett from our consulting team.